Welcome to a Monday episode of Locked On Grizzlies, an episode in which Damichael, Cole, and I, that's right, the dynamic duo rides again. We'll break down everything Grizzlies Thunder, a tough loss for Memphis at home on Saturday night. We'll talk about Ja Morant's struggles in the game and how folks seem to not fully understand the importance of Morant in Memphis, or maybe they do and they're just ignoring it. And we'll also leave today talking about Zach Kleiman and perhaps the most honest press conference we've ever heard. We'll talk about all that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello there, everyone. My name is Joe Mullinax. I am one of your hosts on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and it is always good when I'm able to say one of your hosts because that means Damichael Cole of the Memphis Grizzlies, or Damichael Cole, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal, is here with me. We are your co-hosts for this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. We're excited to talk Grizzlies basketball with you. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast, it's all good. Let Damichael and I be a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. Also, remember, we have a free daily newsletter now, lockedondaily.com. Thank you to everybody that has subscribed to that newsletter. We are now up to about 1,200 subscriptions, which is fantastic.
Good
Again,
work,
it's
Joe.
free. Well, I appreciate that. It's free, right to your inbox. It's not just Grizzlies words from me every day. It's also NBA analysis, fantasy basketball takes, and so much more. So again, lockedondaily.com. Go to lockedondaily.com. Free daily newsletter covering the Memphis Grizzlies through our Locked On Grizzlies network. And shout out to everybody that has already done so. Damichael, it's good to see you again, friend. Obviously, I wish it was under better circumstances after the beating that the Thunder laid on the Grizzlies. It was one of those games where the final score was not indicative of how the game was actually played. If you watch the contest, it was never really in doubt, especially once the third quarter hit. The Thunder were dominant. They are... I think it's important, and I said this on social media at Joe Mullinax on X. Sometimes you have to tip your cap, right? The Oklahoma City Thunder are a generationally good team. And we'll talk about Zach Kleiman later on in the show. I don't think Cam Johnson makes a difference, right? This is something where you watch this Thunder team play, and they still were not full strength, right? Chet Holmgren didn't play due to rest, and there were still things that were not ideal for this OKC team. And yet they were up by 8 at the end of the first quarter. They were up by 19 going into the half, or 17, excuse me, going into the half. And it was just unbelievable. I bring up the third quarter because you might look at the box score and you might say, well, Joe, the Grizzlies were, only down by 4, or they only lost the third quarter by 4. They played better in the third, right? And that's exactly my point, to Michael. They did play better in the third. I would argue the basketball you saw from the Grizzlies in the third quarter, if you want to criticize the first half as being lazy and not locked in, yeah, I would sign off on that. The third quarter looked a lot more like the good Grizzlies basketball we've seen, and they still lost, right? The Thunder are a really good basketball team. I think that deserves to be noted. But there's obviously things starting with the starting point guard, who we'll talk more about later on in the show, where it could have gone better for Memphis. So we'll talk about Ja later on. Maybe we started off with the rookies, Damichael. And this was interesting because Morant plays 36 minutes. Desmond Bane plays 36 minutes. Jaren Jackson Jr. plays 35. This was not a game where you could complain about the minute distribution for the starters unless you're a supporter of Jalen Wells and Zach Edey, who both only played 12 and 13 minutes, respectively. I'm curious. I know you heard about Taylor Jenkins talking about his logic behind it in the post-game presser.
I asked him.
You sure did. What did he say about not using the rookies very much in that at all in the second half? Because again, in fairness, Memphis did look more like themselves in the second half compared to the first.
Yeah, a couple things I could add here before even getting to what he said. And my opinion, just from seeing the situation take place, was I don't think he trusts them completely. in those situations just yet. And that's fine. They're rookies, and we've talked about it time and time again, Joe. That's why Brandon Clark is important. That's why me and you have kind of kept, bringing up the name Vince Williams, who actually was really good in this game because of the fact that you have those contingencies in place when, the rookie effect, or however you want to describe it, comes into play. Because rookies, there are going to be inconsistencies over the course of an NBA season. But what we saw early in the third quarter, I remember it vividly. It was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He drove, down the middle. He got an easy two-handed dunk. Taylor Jenkins calls a timeout. And before this, Taylor Jenkins was, we didn't really talk about it a lot, but like he was pretty fired up over the course of this game. And he kind of got after them a little bit in the locker room during halftime. And then in the first half, at the start of the second half, he calls a couple quick timeouts. And I think that was the second one. He calls a timeout after the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander dunk. Jalen Wells was the primary defender. And I haven't watched the play close enough, but just from a guessing standpoint, I think Zach Edey was supposed to be there, because when you go to the bench after that, when the Grizzlies team comes back to the bench, Taylor Jenkins and the coaches they go out to the floor. They go to the middle of the floor. They have the little, he has the marker and all that in his hand, drawing up stuff.
Meeting of the minds.
Yep, the meeting of the minds. And the Grizzlies bench, it is nonstop talking over there. It's Brandon Clark is in the conversation. It's Desmond Bane, talking to Jalen Wells, talking to Zach Edey, them trying to get these guys. And it was very clear, at least from my point of view, that the conversation that was being had was centered around communication and was centered around getting Zach Edey and Jalen Wells on the same page. And that's why I was led to believe that he's going down the middle of the floor. Jalen Wells maybe was supposed to communicate something there, or whether it was to the guards. Zach Edey was supposed to be there. But the point is, there was a big defensive miscommunication right there. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander gets an easy dunk at the basket. Who were the two guys that were subbed out? It was the two rookies. We didn't see them anymore in the game. Not a single minute more. And it was very noticeable, because there was a stretch where Desmond Bane played a lot and Vince Williams played a lot. And Taylor Jenkins took Vince Williams out because, of course, this was when they started to make the run early in the fourth quarter. Shai Gilgeous had 5 fouls. And when he took out Vince Williams, I'm like, okay, he's probably going to go to another defender here. He put in Luke Kennard. Jalen Wells was sitting over there after pretty much resting the entire third quarter after playing a couple minutes. He put in Luke Kennard. That stood out to me. He was searching for something different. Is the way he described it. He's not going to say I just didn't trust the rookies in this one, but he didn't even go back to them. So that was very notable to me, Joe.
My big thing coming out of this game, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, and the rookies obviously struggle. We're going to talk about Ja here momentarily. Obviously the Super Bowl just happened, right? Super Bowl 59. Josh Allen just won the MVP award. Right. And Josh Allen, there's a really touching video. He does a lot of work at the Children's Hospital up there in Buffalo, and the kids were congratulating him. Josh Allen seems like a legitimate, down-to-earth dude that gets it. So does Lamar Jackson. I like that rivalry. Two good dudes playing good football. But anyway, the reason I bring up Josh Allen is, have the Bills made the Super Bowl with Josh Allen as their quarterback? No. Hasn't happened, right? Because Patrick Mahomes
champions. Yeah.
Because Patrick Mahomes exists. And I think that this is going to be a storyline. You know how we love narratives, partner. I think this is going to be a storyline moving forward, not just for the Grizzlies, but for the Houston Rockets, for the Denver Nuggets. For you probably see where I'm going with this.
Yeah,
for
the Dallas Mavericks.
Between the talent that OKC has accumulated, the size, the scheme that they execute, they are the only team that can really execute this scheme. Maybe Houston to a lesser extent if they do certain things with their lineups, where they can be switchable on defense, they can be attacking. All those guys do so many different things defensively. To have SGA when his shot isn't falling, because it's important to point out, it's not like SGA was super efficient. He did not. He was 8 for 26 or something like that from the field. 13 for 16 from
got to the line, though. He's going to get to the line.
Absolutely. And that was a major difference maker for this Thunder team. The point I'm trying to make is the Thunder are the youngest team in the NBA, and they're already this good. So this will tie into what we're going to talk about with Ja Morant coming up next. we have to, as a media group, fan group, call me whatever you want. Obviously, you're a member of the media. We have to come to grips with this being the Oklahoma City era, I think. And that doesn't mean they'll win the title this year. They're still very young, but they are set up to be really freaking good for a really long time. And you have to decide, not you, Damichael, but you as a person that follows NBA basketball in the Western Conference, outside of maybe the Spurs with Victor Wembanyama, what success is going to look like to you? Because there is nobody outside of maybe the name I just said, Victor Wembanyama.
Is this Joe Mullinax with a defeated mindset right
no,
here?
It's
Are we
not
trying
defeated.
to win a championship or not, Joe?
It's not defeated.
What's going on?
It's tying into what we're going to talk about next with Ja Morant and the Memphis perspective of him coming up next here on the show. We'll talk about that. It'll make sense here in a moment, I promise. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by SKIMS. When I found out that SKIMS was making underwear for men, I was intrigued. I've heard so much about their quality from friends and family. I had to give it a try, and let me tell you, it lives up to the hype. I've had issues with underwear for my entire life. Fit, comfort, finding the right style for me. SKIMS changed all of that. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. I personally am a boxer brief guy, so I went with the 5-inch boxer brief, and I'm hooked. Those are perfect for my active lifestyle. I try to work out every day. They never lose their shape. They stay in place. Whether I'm exercising or running errands, they're the most comfortable and reliable underwear I have ever owned. Shop SKIMS Men at skims.com and SKIMS stores. Let them know we sent you. After you place your order, select podcasts in the survey and select our show, Locked On Grizzlies, in the drop-down menu that follows. And if you're looking for the perfect gift for Valentine's or for yourself, SKIMS just launched their best Valentine's shop ever, available in sizes for women, men, kids, and even pets. Make sure you're checking out SKIMS ASAP. We love SKIMS here at Locked On Grizzlies. All right, so let's get back into this because I feel like maybe I didn't explain myself particularly well. Okay,
you sound like you're just giving the next 10 years away.
Well, no, that's not what I'm doing. Ja Morant struggled mightily against the Oklahoma City Thunder. I believe he was 6 for 19 from the floor, something along those lines. Seemed disconnected. In fairness to him, he was not getting a very good whistle. We mentioned how SGA got 16 free throw attempts. Ja Morant got 4. And if you've ever watched Ja Morant play basketball, chances are he probably should have gotten more than 4 free throws, right? It got so bad that I believe T. Morant, his father, was ejected from the game courtside. I'm assuming because of the officiating, right? If I remember correctly from what I read. That's
exactly what it was for.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So what am I trying to get at here? Ja has struggled. He has shown highs and lows. It's been a tough couple of years for him. Every once in a while, and this gets exhausting, the roller coaster of social media, the idea of trading Ja or moving on from Ja. Ja can't do it. Ja's not what he once was. Ja can't be the guy that Memphis needs him to be. And I want to stress, this is not a referendum on whether or not those people are right, because maybe they are. He has had a lot happen over the last couple of years that maybe Ja Morant will not be the guy that we saw a couple of years ago. That is possible. However, Ja Morant, if he retired today, is the best basketball player in the history of the Memphis Grizzlies franchise. If he said right now, I am done playing basketball, and that's me coming a long way from my grit and grind era where Marc Gasol and Mike Conley exist.
Now I'm listening to you.
Ja Morant is the best player in the history of this franchise. As he goes, the Memphis Grizzlies go. So Taylor Jenkins has today and tomorrow figuring out things, going out to the West Coast before the All-Star break. Obviously, the All-Star break is coming up.
Yep.
Whether it's this new look offense that really good teams are very easily shutting down, whatever it is, over the next week and a half, this has to be a priority. Getting Ja Morant in a place where he is comfortable. Doesn't mean that Ja doesn't have ownership in this. I think you can make an argument, and I want to stress I'd have to do a lot more research. Watching Ja, because of all the injuries he's had, all the distractions that have happened, some his own doing, some not his own doing, how much has his game grown? Is Ja a player that is different now as a basketball player than he was 2 years ago? Has he been able to evolve his game? I think that's something that's worth talking about. But at the same time, even in his state where he is, if you don't have that guy being at worst your second best player, no disrespect to Desmond Bane, Jaren's having a hell of a season. If you don't have Ja in that position against the Thunder or anybody else in the Western Conference, don't get it twisted. The Western Conference is loaded, Damichael Cole. I know you know that. You need Ja Morant to get out of the first round. So for me, that is the storyline to watch these last 30 or so games of the season, is what are they going to do to get Ja Morant in the best position to be successful? Because if they don't, they will lose in the first round of the Western Conference to whoever they play.
Yeah. What if I say it's what Ja Morant is going to do?
That's fair too. Absolutely.
This position, because you go through the last 3 games. The way that the Grizzlies have played, there's been, a decent amount of pick and rolls, the dribble drive stuff, the motion, a lot of that they've done more of for Ja Morant happened in the OKC game too. This was a game that I kind of sort of could have predicted that if Ja would have played the same way he's played in a decent amount of these games over the last month, like from a playing style standpoint, he would struggle. OKC, we knew this coming into the game. Taylor Jenkins mentioned it before the game. This is the number 1 paint prevention scoring team in the NBA. You've been watching Ja for a while. I've been watching Ja for a while. Everyone here's listened, been watching Ja for a while. Ja wants to get to the paint. And sometimes you need the mid-range jumper to fall. You need the three-pointer to fall. He shot some mid-range jumpers in this game. He had a fadeaway. He had a couple pull-ups. He had a couple floaters. They weren't falling. He has to become more efficient in those areas, because if you go back to the last 2 games, what was different? Ja was making shots in those games. I don't think the types of shots in this OKC game as opposed to the last 2 games were that much different. The last 2 games, I'm pointing to 2 games that he scored over 20 points in. I think it was the quality of defense. It was OKC saying, you're coming in our paint, you're going to struggle just like everyone else does. With the number 1 paint prevention team in the NBA. That was a problem. I always go back to those playoff series, because you go back to those playoff series against the Timberwolves, they were very good at preventing, paint scoring opportunities. Ja struggled in the paint. The Lakers, they had Anthony Davis. Ja struggled in the paint. There is kind of a tie-in there, and it kind of carries over into a bigger point when people say, oh, Ja struggled against some of the better defenses in the league this year. If you just look at basketball today, the best defenses in the league are usually teams that can prevent the others from scoring in the paint a lot. That's the easiest shot. That's the easiest opportunities. If you can make that hard on teams, it's going to be a long day for them. And that's something OKC is great at. Ja's game will have to continue to evolve in terms of being efficient. I mean, he had, like, I think an airballed corner 3-pointer. Like, it just wasn't his day. And he can make these shots. He's made them. Can he make them consistently? I don't know. We haven't seen it. Like, at any point, we've seen stretches in his career. We haven't seen it consistently. That's what it boils down to. And before I move on, you mentioned the whole thing with OKC. I think that's fair. OKC is a very good team across the board. They were missing some really big pieces as well.
2 important parts of that defense, Chet Holmgren and Lou Dort. Imagine if Dort was playing.
Casey Wallace could be all defensive player too. I mean, 3 parts of that defense. But I think, like you said, the Western Conference is really good. You want to tie in the entire Western Conference picture to this thing, you would say simply, look, you better hope like a team like the Mavs catches OKC before you do, because I don't think it's a great matchup for the Grizzlies, and particularly because of what we're going to tie it back to. It's not a great matchup for Ja unless he's knocking down shots. This is not a team that Ja is going to just get to the rim, jump over guys, and score 20 points in the paint against.
To bring it all back full circle, I think that in this OKC era, where they are going to be near the top of the Western Conference unless there's some sort of injury for the next few years, right? Because they're eventually going to have to pay all these dudes, and they're not going to. That's the irony of the Thunder era, right? They're a small market team just like the Grizzlies. They're not going into the second apron. That's not going to happen. So they'll make the choice of who they want to keep. They have a few year window here, though, where they're going to be really freaking good.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to compete with this group, you're going to need Ja Morant. Over the span of this era of Ja, he has been one of the top 5 players on the planet in flashes, right? He has to be that guy for a more consistent period of time. And part of that is the evolution of his game into taking what the defense gives him and not just trying to be a force of will. Because eventually you're going to run into a team like the Thunder that are going to be able to take that and turn it against you. And it leads to frustration about foul calls. And it leads to somebody like Ja having to try to reconcile in his mind how he can get his game going. At some point, there has to be a realization that the method has to adjust. It has to evolve. It has to adapt. He obviously has a couple more games here before the All-Star break, not an All-Star this year, so he'll have a chance to clear his mind, and hopefully he comes back crystal clear, ready for the stretch run. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, Damichael, you were present for Zach Kleiman's press conference media availability after the trade deadline. One of the most honest trade deadline availabilities, probably the most honest of Zach Kleiman's era. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. FanDuel's live betting feature is a blast because it keeps every moment of every game exciting. You can feel like your team has a chance and get in on the action. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So again, Damichael, you were there on hand listening to Zach Kleiman after a controversial trade deadline for the Memphis Grizzlies. He said the right things in some ways. They tried to make several star connections, reports of them calling about Kevin Durant. Maybe that's rumor, speculation, whatever the case might be. Cam Johnson, it's safe to assume there were conversations there. Lots of different names were mentioned throughout the whole process. Obviously, Jimmy Butler. I do like how Kleiman kind of said, I don't know where that came from. I'm curious as to your takeaway about the way that he handled Marcus Smart, because one of the biggest controversial pieces was having to pay the first to Washington just to move off of that contract. It's not like Marvin Bagley, who we'll talk more about on tomorrow's episode, is coming in to take the starting center role, right? We were talking about Smart being connected to freaking Jimmy Butler. And now the realization of him being a sunken cost. I don't want to put words in Kleiman's mouth, but that's essentially the way he made it seem. Like they had to get rid of this negative asset just so they could do future business a little bit more effectively. Is that kind of your takeaway too, or am I misreading it?
Yeah, I think when you saw the trade, I don't know why I expect a lot of people to really be logical in that situation. I didn't read, I didn't really cover the trade deadline as much as I usually do because of, some away from work things. But
it was like a bomb went off. It was unbelievably depressing for a majority of Grizzlies fans. I was the positive one, Damichael. I was the positive one.
That tells me a lot right there. That tells me a lot, Joe. But the fact that he was traded and an asset had to be added on to that, I thought that should provide clarity to the fans that have said, oh, let's trade Marcus Smart in a package to get these game-changing, type of players. If you had to attach an asset to the Washington Wizards, what do you think you would have had to do to the Brooklyn Nets or to, the Phoenix Suns for Kevin Durant or whatever other star player that you may imagine that the Grizzlies could have used to get to the next level, so to speak. He wasn't the same player, at least viewed around the league, as the one that the Grizzlies got from the Boston Celtics in that trade. So, look, as Zach Kleiman said, you cut your costs. You realize, hey, it didn't work. That's what he said. The trade didn't work. He admitted it. You mentioned how open and honest he was. That really stood out to me. So, he was open and honest about that, and with the Jake LaRavia situation as well, because Jake LaRavia, I've always felt like is a guy that they've grown to like this season, so to speak. But getting into the situation, I mean, he described it perfectly. You know, he said, look, paraphrasing, but Vince Williams, Jalen Wells, and Scottie Pippen Jr., he even used them when he was talking about Marcus Smart. When the Grizzlies acquired Marcus Smart, Vince Williams was a guy still on a two-way contract. They didn't know they didn't know he was going to be this. Jalen Wells was transferring from Sonoma State to Washington State. Like, this was a D2 player at the time. And Scottie Pippen Jr., was in the Lakers organization, not even really getting a real opportunity there. So they had no idea that these three players were going to emerge to the significance that they have so far. And then you factor in the G.G. Jacksons of the world too. It's just not a lot of room for Marcus Smart or Jake LaRavia. Like those two guys have kind of been phased out, in a way. So the way Kleiman explained that made a lot of sense to me. But I think people too want to criticize the Grizzlies, say, oh, they never make the big move or whatever the case may be. And it's one of those situations to me, Joe, where you won't really understand until you're in the shoes. Like, they try to put it lightly. Like, they are going out there swinging, and they have the draft capital, to potentially make these things happen, so to speak. But when Marcus Smart is essentially a negative asset, and that's the biggest contract that you have available. And you'll remember, Joe, before the trade deadline, I talked about the idea of keeping Marcus Smart throughout the rest of the remainder of the season, and then reevaluating things and going into the summer where he has an expiring deal and potentially packaging it in. Because at that point I knew, like, Marcus Smart has played, I mean, I forget the numbers, but he played less than, I think it was 30% of Grizzlies games since he's been here. Like, you just don't have enough of a sample size of how good he could be in that role. But Zach Kleiman touched on him. He touched on Jake LaRavia. I think how he addressed the star hunting, thing, saying that, look, we didn't see the perfect opportunity or the right opportunity to cash in right now. So what's the next best thing? If you can't go out there and get your so to speak, star talent, in the Grizzlies case, the next thing is making sure that they're flexible for that next run at that, which is the offseason, which is this summer. So in the mind of Zach Kleiman, they have the flexibility to do whatever they want to do in the summer. And look, I'm not opposed to it. Like, at the end of the day, I'm with you, Joe. You summed it up perfectly. They go out and get Cam Johnson. It wouldn't have made a difference against OKC. And it sucks to say, but like, that ain't even the best version of OKC. Like, we haven't touched on Jaren Jackson Jr. in this game. In this episode, but I thought Jaren, at least on the offensive end, he was the one guy who could get his shot, and he was the one guy who forced OKC's defense to adjust to him. He was the one guy they were bringing doubles to. They were coming from different angles and things like that. You could tell it was a priority to slow down Jaren Jackson Jr. Well, guess what? This might be the last time where you have that much of an advantage with Jaren Jackson Jr. because the next time they could have Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren instead of Jalen Williams guarding him. So, there are certain things where it's like, this was a missed opportunity in a way. But at the same time, I don't see that, like I said before the deadline, I didn't see that deal that puts them on that next level. And I think the next best thing you do was to create that flexibility just in case that deal presents itself in the summer. Who knows what's going to happen in Phoenix if they get swept again in the first round of Kevin Durant's like, look, man, I'm 36. I can't do this anymore. And Memphis may become a more realistic option at that point, or you never know. You know how these off seasons go. All we know, Anthony Edwards could say, all right, Minnesota, y'all traded Cat. I tried to give it a year. I don't want to be here anymore. You never know. So they'll have the flexibility in the summer, which is important to point out. And Zach Kleiman definitely made sure to let people know that.
Luka Doncic was traded. Anything is possible.
Anything's possible.
We are in a whole new NBA world. I'm curious to see how it plays out in terms of OKC and how everybody's chasing them in the Western Conference. I want to stress, if Memphis makes it to the Western Conference Finals and they lose to the Oklahoma City Thunder in 5 games, which it would be my prediction right now. That's the best team in Memphis Grizzlies history. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at earlier. We can have a big talk, championship or bust, and I'm guilty of that. Do you want to win a championship or not? But you also have to, especially in a market like Memphis, and OKC has done it better than Memphis has. Yeah. Especially in a market like Memphis, you have to be able to be good for a long period of time. You can't afford to be the Lakers or the Heat or a team that's bad for a consistent time if you have a big fan base and they follow you still. That doesn't happen in Memphis. People will do other things with their money. There is not money that is in that space where you can afford to just have bad seasons. You have to be competitive. You have to have a shot. And I think that this was a move to re-sign Jaren in the summer potentially in a more, advantageous way for the Grizzlies. Perhaps Santi Aldama sticking around is more realistic now with the Marcus Smart money gone. Yeah. There are things that they did that are like the act of a tanking team, essentially. But you have to understand from the angle, and this is the hardest part. It's the hardest part for me. Marcus Smart clearly is not good anymore, right? Like, even if you wanted to argue, we'll keep him and see if he recoups some value, right? Maybe he goes out and he balls out in the playoffs. Zach Kleiman and coaches, because the coaching staff, they don't make the decision, but they're let in on what's happening. They made the conscious choice that now was the time to cut bait, and they sent him to essentially NBA purgatory in the Washington Wizards, a team that if Marcus Smart never plays for them, they don't care. They don't care. They are happy with the assets and they are happy with moving on. And that's the hardest thing to rectify in my mind. But to close it out here, I posted on X a poll, the most disappointing moves in Grizzlies history, or the most disappointing players in Grizzlies history. Kudos to 77% of Grizzlies fans. Chandler Parsons remains number one with a big fat X across his face anytime he comes through the Memphis airport, if he ever does again come through Memphis. My point being, it was a misstep. Kleiman owned that misstep. Cut your losses. And it's certainly not the same as giving Chandler Parsons $100 million. Let Damichael and I know in the comments. Hit us up on X at Damichael C. For Damichael, at Joe Mullinax for me. How are you feeling about Zach Kleiman's press conference? Your take on Ja? Keep the conversation going. We've had lots of great stuff going on in the comments on YouTube, for example. Keep it nice. Right? None of you know each other. Let's not say mean things to each other. You can say mean things to me, but leave Damichael alone because he's a wonderful angel. The next time that we're together here on Locked On Grizzlies, we have yet partnered to talk about Marvin Bagley, right? The Grizzlies have barely talked about Marvin Bagley.
He was at the game. He was at the last game too.
Not Marcus Bagley, who I mistakenly said last time.
I heard that.
Yeah,
that's his brother. That is his brother, by the way.
I know. I caught some fair crap for that. Marvin Bagley is who we probably should touch on a little bit on our next edition of the show. And we probably have some other angles that we need to take in terms of looking at the Grizzlies ahead of the All-Star break after a back-to-back out west.
Yeah. Important back-to-back out west as well. Two games that'll be really important in determining, the outlook for this team, I think, going forward. People, the way they lost OKC, everybody's going to circle back to, we can't contend with good teams. OKC beat Cleveland by 20. OKC has beaten pretty much everyone. I mean, the Mavs gotten them 3 times, but the Mavs just traded Luka, so we'll see if they hurt their chances of beating them or help them or whatever the case may be. But the Mavs are probably your best bet from that standpoint. But overall, I mean, OKC is just a juggernaut. Like they've done this to pretty much everyone, and the Grizzlies have a chance to kind of rectify some of the ill will over the weekend by beating up on a couple really good teams. Well, a couple solid teams here coming up.
Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Make Damichael and I a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. Also, make sure you're checking out LockedOnDaily.com. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. Subscribe to our free daily newsletter, Grizzlies Words from Me, NBA analysis, fantasy basketball advice, and so much more. LockedOnDaily.com. Click on the Locked On Grizzlies tab and subscribe to our free daily newsletter. For Damichael Cole, I am Joe Mullinax. We will catch you next time. Stay locked in. Stay positive. It's not all bad. It's not all sunshine and rainbows either, but you know what? It could be worse. You could be the Dallas Mavericks protesting your GM. Have a good one.